Okay, so I think we can probably go ahead and get started. Other folks will join us. Thank you to all the people who are writing into the question box that you can see my slides. It's wonderful to hear because on my end, all I see is like errors next to all of your names. So maybe very quickly, since it's such a small group of us, I'm going to global unmute you all. What that means is that you will then be able to click the little microphone icon next to your name in the control panel and you can talk and everybody can hear you. So if everyone just like wants to go ahead and say hi, you don't have to say any more than that, but this is Jessie Kirshner. I haven't even said that yet from EcoAdapt. So I'll go ahead and unmute everybody if you want to just say hi, since we haven't seen each other in about 6 months.
Irina.
Hello, this is Julie from CC.
Hi, Irina. Hi, Julie. Looks like there's other folks that are going to chime in too.
Hi, this is Hillary from Parks Canada.
Hi, Hillary.
Hi, this is Kathy from the Park Service.
Hi, Kathy.
Hi, it's Carol Bernthal from Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary in Washington State. Good morning, everyone.
Hi, this is Katie Rubel, also with Olympic Coast National Marine Sanctuary.
Hi, Carol. Hi, Katie.
Hi, this is Christy with the CC.
Hi, everyone. This is Tammy from Stellar National Marine Sanctuary.
Hi, Tammy.
Hi, everyone. This is from NOAA's National MPA Center.
Hi, this is Marlo Palat from Parks Canada.
Is there anybody else that wants to chime in?
Hi everyone, this is Veronica Mendieta from CONAMP, Mexico.
Hi, Veronica.
Hi, it's Gabrielle from Parks Canada in Nova Scotia.
Gabrielle. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and mute you all again, but I'll unmute you later. Thank you for joining us today. So just a couple of housekeeping things to let people know about. The webinar is being recorded, so we'll make that recording available later. And it is, thank you all for saying hi. It's wonderful to hear voices after not having seen everybody for a long time, and just given all the changes that have occurred in the last 6 months since we've seen each other. So the presentation I will be giving will be fairly short, 35 to 40 minutes, I think. And I'll just keep everybody on global mute for that time. And then at the end, I'll unmute everybody and you can ask questions and we can have some discussion, or if you want to provide feedback on anything. If you do have questions during the presentation, I'll do my best to try and keep track of those. But if I miss them, I'll come back to it at the end. And you can write questions in the question box or in the chat box, and I'll just try to keep track of those as we go. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So just a reminder what I'm going to be talking about today, and a reminder of the workshop that we had in January. The Coastal Impacts Mitigation and Adaptation Workshop was January 22nd and 23rd in Merida. And the goal of that workshop was to provide training on how to use the Climate Adaptation Toolkit for marine and coastal protected areas in adaptation planning. And I realized that because so much has happened in the last several months, that I really needed to go through this for myself as well. What exactly did we do at this workshop? Because it feels like it's been so long ago. So just to jog your memory, the structure, we had short presentations followed by small group exercises. So each presentation and the group exercise was organized by the steps here on the scuba map on the right, where we had step 1 was focused on project scoping, step 2 on awareness and assessment, step 3 on planning, step 4 on implementation and integration, and then step 5 on evaluation. Following those small group exercises, we had large group discussions and sharing and feedback. And then, of course, at the very end of the workshop, we had presentations by each of the groups. And then throughout the workshop, through both days, we were collecting feedback through the verbal comments that people were giving as part of those discussions, and then also through the Post-its that you all wrote on and then put up on the wall according to the different steps that we were on. And we had 4 breakout groups, again, just to help jog your memory of which one you might have participated in: salt marshes, coral reefs, pelagic, and then beaches and dunes. So I wanted to just give a very general overview of the changes that we've made so far and what we did following that workshop, so everybody's up to speed. So Sarah and I took all the feedback that we received, both verbally and from the Post-its themselves, and put those together depending on what step they matched up to within the scuba map. And we made several changes to the training module, the exercises that everybody was doing at the workshop, and then have identified changes for the toolkit itself. And so generally, some of the things that we've been doing are modifying or clarifying some of the exercises. So for example, in some cases for a given step, we've added new questions to the exercises, or we've tried to clarify some of the terminology or things that people had trouble with at the workshop. We have incorporated much of the materials from the presentations that we gave into the training module text. So if you recall, the training module was that packet of information that you were given in addition to the exercises themselves. So we've incorporated a lot of information from the presentations into that training module. We have created fillable PDFs for the different exercises, and I'm going to walk through that later at the end of this. And then within the toolkit itself, we're looking at ways to streamline some information within the adaptation actions table, trying to make terminology more consistent, and also to add in some new resources that have come up either from ones that participants recommended or new ones that we have found. So what I'm going to do for the next little bit is I want to spend some time going through each of the steps and then talk a bit, just jog your memory about what it was that we did and ask you to do in terms of the exercises and then the content that was in the training module and what we've changed. So you can see where that went. So for the project scoping, the first step, we asked you to, within your habitat group, to describe and define your habitat and then its project boundary, select the time scale that you're interested in assessing, and then selecting your top 3 most significant climate and non-climate stressors. And so I would say one of the first things that we did in the revised version of the exercise, and it's now within the training module itself, is that we added a new question and a new place for you to describe human uses and ecosystem services. So we had received some comments from participants that it would be helpful to describe these uses, economic activities, and values of the habitat. And then in fact, several groups went through that exercise independently to help them think about what the big stressors might be. And it was just a good reflection of thinking about the value of the habitat itself. So it did, again, come into play when you're trying to prioritize climate and non-climate stressors, but it also came up again in the adaptation planning part of the workshop where people were thinking about either the kinds of strategies that you might want to implement in order to help preserve some of those services or values, or thinking about ways you would prioritize different strategies if you're trying to make sure that you are either identifying the strategies that might have additional benefits or just, again, making sure to preserve some things. So that component has now been added to project scoping, and then it's a place to note those different aspects. And then for the climate and non-climate stressors, again, a comment that we got from many people is that they went through within their group an independent exercise to rank the different stressors from like either low to high, 1 to 3, however they wanted to do it, but they felt that it was important to have a ranking scale for the stressors. Previously, we just had a list of what the stressors were and said, from this list, pick your top 3. And so what we've added now into the exercise is the ability to rank these. And we just decided to go low, moderate, and high rather than 1 to 3 to make it a little bit more clear. And I'll walk through the fillable PDFs in a little bit, but even if you select 5, for example, different climate stressors that are high impact, you still have to end up making that determination of what you want to choose as your top 3. But this just gives you the opportunity to like track your thinking as you're looking at each of these stressors and what the impact is on your habitat. The other thing that came up, particularly around non-climate stressors, was that there was a lot of confusion about what some of the terms meant. So when we had a term for a non-climate stressor, one that came up multiple times was, what do we mean by land force non-nutrient pollution? And so within the exercises, now we've added examples of what we're talking about. So for that, it would be things like plastics or PCBs. So where we saw confusion that happened across multiple groups, that's what we've tried to do now, is to clarify what we mean when we say those different stressors. So for the second step, awareness and assessment, we went through a couple of different parts to that. The first part is that we asked you to fill out a climate change impact summary table for the different stressors. And we didn't receive any significant comments. Actually, I don't think any comments on this particular part of the training module or the exercise. So no changes were made to this component of step 2. But certainly within the vulnerability assessment, we did get a number of different comments. And this is where there were 3 different tables that we asked you to fill out. One was like a master climate change vulnerability assessment table. One was focused just on consequences, and then one was focused on adaptive capacity. And you kind of had to flip through them and transfer information from one to the master table. And I think it just ended up being a lot of looking through paper to find what you'd written in different places. And so to the exercises themselves, to these tables, there have been very minor formatting changes, but we did take some comments around like it'd be helpful if you color-coded tables with the columns that you're referring to. So for example, you can see on this slide, consequences column is orange, adaptive capacity is blue. When you go to those tables in the exercises, they're colored orange and blue. So you can see that link hopefully more clearly. And we've done some other things like within the adaptive capacity table, have tried to give more space to writing notes or rationale around why you're selecting or rating different factors the way you are. And that just came up as something where when you're thinking about, the adaptive capacity within your agency, for example, for monitoring one of your stressors, like around acidification, maybe there's already a monitoring program in place for that, but for temperature, there isn't. And so the adaptive capacity, when you're looking at those different stressors, might be different. And so we're trying to give you the space in which you want to note those kinds of caveats or important details. And then the other thing that we've changed within the adaptive capacity table, because it is all, you're assigning numbers to all of the different adaptive capacity factors, the fillable PDFs now do the calculations for you. So it just calculates the average so that you don't have to if you're using that fillable PDF. And I would be curious, as people test out these new fillable PDFs, if that ends up causing maybe more problems than solving them. So there'll be some things I'll be curious if people try to use these and to get some feedback on how they work. Another thing, let's see, there's a couple of things that we made in terms of changes to the training module text that was associated with the vulnerability assessment. That's where most of the feedback that we received from participants, it got incorporated into that training module itself. So we, for example, added more of a detailed discussion around scenario planning, provided a link to a scenario planning reference, because we did have the salt marsh group go through that scenario planning exercise. And so we wanted to make sure we were at least talking about it and pointing people in the direction of how they could use that in this kind of vulnerability assessment framework. So that has now been added into the training module text. We've added more detailed instructions for filling out the worksheets. And then one of the biggest comments that we've gotten even outside of this workshop is just around the likelihood rating scale. So this is, the likelihood is akin to like the exposure, how likely is this event going to happen? And so there's always a lot of confusion around the term almost certain. And then when you look at the definition saying that it's greater than 50% probability, because when you hear almost certain, you're thinking the probability must be like greater than 90%. And that seems misleading. And you really have to look at that definition to understand what we're asking for. So within the training module right now, what we've done is provide a link to where that rating scale came from. It actually came from work that the Australian government had done around risk and impacts assessment for different sectors, for business within different government areas, natural resources, agriculture. But I am curious if it's going to be hard for us to like full-scale change this table, but if there's a way that we can clarify or put maybe parentheses after almost certain where we say something like more likely than not. I'm looking for input as to maybe how we could help so that it's not quite such like a hard stop when you come to it and you have to think about it. And if, like I said, or do we just change almost certain to more likely than not? So just looking, as you think about it, if you think there's a way to make that particular term more clear or to change it, I'd be interested to get your feedback. And if you have an idea now, feel free to write it into the chat box, or you can email me later, or also mention it during the Q&A towards the end. Okay, so the third step was on adaptation planning, where we asked you to identify 3 or more adaptation strategies, and then based on the vulnerabilities that you had talked about, and then evaluate their cost and efficacy. So some of the things that we've done, some of the changes that we've made, we have now added a column to the exercise, the last column E, to note co-benefits and conflicts that are associated with that adaptation strategy. That was a comment that we got during the workshop, that it's important to note those kinds of things. And it's very important when you're thinking about how you might prioritize strategies for implementation. So say you have something that's very highly effective, has low cost, but then when you look, it has a lot of conflicts with other resources or with other values. And in that case, it's probably not a strategy that you would want to move forward with. And so it's an important thing to note and think through when you're deciding what you would want to incorporate into your plans or projects. And the other thing that we have clarified a little bit more based on comments that we got at the workshop was around cost. So we've added some language to the training module for when you're evaluating cost, not just to think about whether it's a one-time cost, but really to think about, is this strategy, is it going to require sustained funding over time for maintenance, for monitoring, whatever it is, but thinking about costs more broadly, not just in that one-time implementation piece, but like, do we need to find a long-term funding source for this if we're going to, because we have to continue doing something with it. And so we've added that as you're thinking about how you might evaluate cost for a given strategy. And then one of the other things that we did, again, add into the training module text itself was to talk a bit more again about scenario planning and the benefits of doing that at this stage and what it can help you to do. Again, because we had that group go through the scenario planning exercise and they found it very helpful in thinking about what they might do and how actions would or would not differ depending on the scenarios they were looking at. Okay, so the implementation and integration, again, 2 parts to this particular step where we ask you to develop out these very general implementation plans for adaptation strategies. So identifying who the lead might be, and the partners needed, funding needed, the timeline, all of that. And then stepping outside of your habitat group, working and thinking about ways that you can integrate climate adaptation into your work, into your agency, and more of that sort of mainstreaming discussion. So thinking more about your individual perspective and not necessarily from the habitat group perspective. So those were the two parts that we worked through at the workshop. Because for both of these exercises and for the content that was in there, we didn't get a lot of feedback in terms of things that needed to be changed or added. So I'd say the biggest change that we've made to this particular step is just spending a lot of time in integrating or incorporating the information from Sarah's presentation and the feedback that we received from participants during the Q&A into the training module. So we spent a lot more time talking about strategies for successful implementation, because Sarah talked a lot about that in her presentation. And then we also integrated information about where we see common implementation challenges or barriers and potential solutions or ways to start to think about how you might overcome those barriers. So that information is now within the training module as just another support for people to think about when they're building out these implementation plans. Okay, the last step that we did was around evaluation and sharing. So again, for monitoring and evaluation, this was very focused on your habitat for the different adaptation strategies that you had picked. We asked you to identify desired outcome, monitoring parameter and method, and then the management trigger. And following this exercise, everybody in the group decided how the kind of medium that they wanted to do the large group present back on what you guys did. And it was a good end to the workshop. So this particular exercise, I think we heard from everybody that the management trigger term that we had included in the exercise was very confusing. And we had suggestions to change this to something like a red flag indicator. And so that's the term that we stuck with. And again, as you work through this, if you go through this exercise again, either independently with your coworkers or colleagues, I'd be curious to see if this term seems to resonate more or work better for folks. But remember that red flag term was meant for you to think about an indicator that will signal the diversion from your desired outcome. So you implement this strategy, you're headed down this path to reach some end goal, and all of a sudden you're veering off to some unknown place. And so that red flag is to say, like, oh, we've now veered off away from our end goal, and we need to stop doing what we're doing and reevaluate and think about what we need to do instead to get us back on track. So we did change that within the exercise and the training module to reflect that red flag term. And then similar to implementation and integration, a lot of the content from the presentation and the participant Q&A was incorporated into the training module text. So we have a lot more information in there now about ideas or strategies for successful monitoring and evaluation, some of the common barriers to monitoring and evaluation, and potential strategies for overcoming those barriers or solutions that you can start to think about. So let's see, those, just a second. Those are the biggest changes that we've made for just going through each of those steps. And what I'd like to do is spend some time now going through the training module exercises, the fillable PDFs, and show you what we've done. And again, curious as you test these out to see like where there might be hangups, but I'll go through this in just a second. Okay, so hopefully everybody can still see this. This is the training module exercises. Now they're all together in one PDF form that is fillable. We had to do it as one form just so that they link together and we can pre-populate answers as you go through it. So for example, on the first exercise 1, project scoping, you'll type in our habitat is mangroves. You'll type that in, you write in the definition of your habitat, and then you can describe your project boundary. And the reason I wrote definition in here and boundary 85 million times is just to show you that although the sizes of these boxes look very small, the more text you add, it will correct itself to make more space for the text. So you're not necessarily limited by the spacing that you see on the page. It'll just shrink your text to fit it into that box. So just something to note. There's the category around human uses in ecosystem services, and then assessment timescale. We're going to say near term. Oh, I just found a spelling mistake. That's good. And then here, climate stressors, you can see the ranking scale that's here for the different stressors. And as I mentioned before, you will still, after you go through that exercise, you are still going to have to write in what you think are your top climate stressors. So we'll just say sea level rise and temperature and salinity. So you still have to do that final decision, and you have to do the same for your non-climate stressors. So again, here's where we've tried to clarify some of the terms, where we gave examples. I think this is one where we had a lot of confusion, and then also around transport and what we were talking about there. But again, you'll have to write in your non-climate stressors, dredging, we'll say dredging and transport. So you fill those in, and because these are linked, what you'll start to see is that all this information now pre-populates for you. So once you entered in your habitat type, it now copies it down for you and copies your time scale. Your climate stressors get pre-populated for you, and that just continues through the different tables. So for your vulnerability assessment, again, these all are copied here for you. This also comes up, again, with the non-climate stressors, and then within the tables themselves, once you assign values to these things, like minor or major, and then you go back to your master table, again, it's all linked, so it just copies it for you, so you don't have to do that, and that information's all there. And it does the same within adaptive capacity down here. So, and I mentioned earlier that for adaptive capacity, we did this average for you. So once you enter in your numerical values, it will calculate that average for you. The challenge is if you add an other category, it will not add that in. So I'm still trying to figure out a way around that, but that is something to note. We don't typically get other categories added, but if you do add one, you'll have to calculate that average on your own. But so the averages are pre-calculated. If I change this to a 2, you'll see it changes it down here. And it gives you that combined average, and then you still have to write in, this is now moderate for your overall adaptive capacity, but then once you go up to your top table, again, it copies it in for you. So it's just trying to eliminate that back and forth for you, so you don't have to transfer information quite so much. All of the adaptive capacity definitions are still within here. And then for the adaptation strategy development table, the vulnerability information and the climate stressors, again, will pre-populate here. So we just have the first, or the 3 that you've selected pre-populate here, but we've given you space. So if you want to add additional strategies for temperature, you can just write it in. But we wanted to make sure that you at least try to come up with adaptation strategies for each of the top 3 that you selected. So once you write this in, we'll say facilitate managed retreat. You can see evaluating all these different costs, efficacy, and then the co-benefits. It will, again, pre-populate in the tables below. So all of that is there, and it does the same. This is for the monitoring and evaluation. So hopefully this just makes it a little bit easier. You're not having to look back and forth and find everything that you were referring to in the previous exercises. But like I said, I'm very curious to see how this works for people, and if they think it would, some of the pre-population actually makes it more challenging to put in what you want. So you can let me know. Okay. And the last thing that I wanted just to talk about briefly are the upcoming revisions to the toolkit itself. And there's not going to be any sort of substantial changes, but just to remind you, this is the toolkit homepage, and some of the things that we're doing or in the process of doing right now are adding some of the recommended resources that people flagged at the workshop. So there's some things that people flagged as good to add to, like the foundational resources page, for example, which is this book icon. And then also adding some recommended resources and papers to the adaptation actions table. We're also trying to make sure that terminology is consistent across the 3 resources. So we have, this website, this toolkit, we have the training module and exercises that everybody went through at the workshop, and then we have this RVA, Rapid Vulnerability Assessment tool. And we just want to make sure that terminology is consistent across all 3. So no matter which one you're looking at, you can understand what we're trying to say. So like making sure if it says strategies in the RVA tool and it says strategies in the training module, that the toolkit also says strategies. So just trying to flag some of those inconsistencies and change them so that they match across all 3. And then we are also adding new case studies, tools, and climate stressors to some of the actions, and even clarifying or modifying some of the language around some of the different actions that are within that table. So I'll show you what I'm referring to. So this is the offline version of that adaptation actions table, where we have, if you look at line 36 for coral reef, we are looking at this particular action or option and realizing that we need to add some climate stressors to that list, have found a new source to add, and then have found a new case study that we can add that's on CAKE, and then also have found some additional multiple tools and resources that will also help and that people can refer to now if they're looking at implementing that particular option. So that's just one example. Another is down here for estuaries and wetlands, where again, we're adding some more stressors when we're looking at what you're actually going to accomplish with this option, thinking that these stressors are good to incorporate as well. And then some new case studies that are out there and available, and then links to those different resources. So just trying, as we're going through this, we're actually involved in another marine and coastal project and have found some new resources through that. And so trying to fill those in here where we see that opportunity. So that's where we're at with some fairly minor, I would say, changes to the adaptation actions table, but trying to add new things to it. So just very briefly, next steps, and this is going to be incredibly general, and I apologize for that, but just given the times that we're in, this is where we're at. We are still talking about doing additional trainings in fall of 2020, whether those are in person or virtual, just to be determined. It just all determines, is all dependent on how things continue with restrictions and all of that. And then I'm hoping to see, through the trainings, there will be further testing of the training module and the exercises. But again, if you take the updated version of the training module and exercises and test them out by yourself or with some colleagues or coworkers, and you want to send any feedback, I will be incorporating that feedback into revised versions. So this project goes through December of 2020, so we have lots of time still to incorporate any sort of suggested changes and edits to the toolkit, or I'm sorry, to the training module and the exercises. And Lucy or Julie may have more to see about, or have more to say about like the next steps or other things. So with this, that's what I've got for the presentation piece. I am going to now unmute everybody. Remember that if you would like to talk, you are still going to have to unmute your little icon next to your name. So as of now, you're all officially unmuted. And if there's any questions or comments or things that people want to share, thank you, Carol, for that you like the new fillable forms. I hope they work, but so let me know.
The only question, this is Carol. The one question I had on the form, on the new forms is, I like that you have the different climate and non-climate stressors, high, medium, low impact. I think it's a good kind of thought exercise for you to go through. But I noticed there was no way to kind of document. So say you get 6 high impact things and you select 3. You might want to have some place in that form that you can document why you picked those 3.
Okay, great. Yep. That's very helpful. Good point. Thank you.
This is Irina from Park Service. I'm really, really happy about the fillable and then where it self-populates. Love it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Gabrielle from Parks Canada. I second what Irina just said, and what I think most people are thinking. The fillable forms is going to be really excellent, and I can commit to having our summer student who's currently working on some climate change documentation to run through a test if you like, and I'll keep you up to date on that.
Great. That would be great. Thank you, Gabrielle. It looks like Julie has a question for the group. Has anyone used or do they have plans to use the module or toolkit since the training?
This is Carol from Olympic Coast. We are planning on using the process and the toolkit sometime next year with our Sanctuary Advisory Council, which is a stakeholder group, and running through the rapid vulnerability assessment for looking at assessing climate change and developing adaptation and mitigation strategies. I don't have a more date certain when that will start, but we are definitely planning it for this coming year. So this timing of the training update and module exercises and all these things you just went over is really good for us.
Great.
Hi, this is Veronica from CONAMP, and I have one question and one comment. The question is about the PDF fillable form. Is it available also in Spanish? It would be very helpful for us to have it also in Spanish. And the comment is about also the PDF. I think it's a great solution for make it easier to fill all the tables. But once you are like really know how the process and all the steps, I mean, I think for the first at the first time you are getting to know the toolkit, you really need to know it by hand and know why and how each value and an average is how you are getting to that answer. I think it's really necessary to know each step and each answer, and then to replicate. And now that you know how to do it, this PDF will be really, really useful and save a lot of time. But I think that the first time you are getting to know the toolkit, it would be helpful if we still do it as the first time as we did it in Merida. And that's it.
Thanks, Veronica. That's great.
Sorry, but my question was that if you have available the PDF in Spanish, is it available? Or
oh, right.
can
Sorry.
chime in.
Yes. Julie. Yes, I'll let Julie answer that.
Great. Well, initially, since there were kind of many revisions planned over the year, we were kind of maybe waiting to the end of the year to review the translation. But that being said, if you have a specific event or you would like to organize a training in Mexico and you want the PDF in Spanish, like we can organize it now. Like when there's a need, we're happy to do it. But for now, we were kind of planning to do that once we have the final version in English, if that makes sense.
okay, thank you.
Hi, Hillary here from Parks Canada. We are planning on tentatively trialing this in a Canada on both eelgrass and siltmarsh habitats. We haven't figured out the details yet, but something in the works here for the fall.
Great. Okay, Chantal, so the new forms, I see your question, are the new forms already available? They're not on the website, but they should be in Dropbox. If they're not in Dropbox, our shared Dropbox, then I'll make sure they're in there today, but they should, I think they're already in there.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you now. I heard okay.
I've been trying to unmute and mute. I changed my my microphone. Yeah, I was just, because you were also showing for the case study, there were things in red that were changing. So all those changes aren't up yet. They're still in the works.
Right, for the actual adaptation actions table that's on the toolkit, those changes are we're still going through all of that. So those have not been updated. The only things that are updated and available is the training module text and the exercises, so the fillable PDFs. Those are both available through the Dropbox. But the table itself, we haven't finished the revisions to yet.
Okay, great. Thank you. We'll take a look.
And Sarah, to your point about the ability to rate the stressors differently under the adaptive capacity table. So I think what we had talked about was to try to just leave that open under the notes column of that. And I think we flagged it in the training module text that people can do that in the notes column. But you're right, there isn't, like if you do the average, if you're providing different values, it'll, like that average won't consider it, if that answers your question. And if you think of a way around it, let me know.
Hi, this is Kathy from the Park Service Northeast US, and I concur with everybody else about the fillable and carry things forward to the other pages being great. And I think it will actually make it be used a lot more by our individual units the simpler it is. So that's great. My only question would be about that averaging thing, and that if the other one can't be averaged in, maybe the average shouldn't be there at all, because people, sometimes tend to just take what's there. So they might put a number in there and just assume the average includes the other two.
Yeah, totally. So we just remove that automatic calculation and just let people calculate it themselves.
I think this is Irina from Park Service. Maybe remove other. If you said that almost never has that come up, maybe just remove it, or find some techie to help you, you know, at Adobe to help you figure that out.
Totally. Okay. I think I've gotten everybody's questions from the question box, but please chime in if I've missed you. Okay, well, Julie or Lucy, is there anything that you want to say before I end the webinar?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jessie, for suggesting this webinar. I think it's good to kind of remind ourselves everything that we saw at Merida first, and also have access to these updated versions. I did send these the updated PDF by email, but if you can't find it for whatever reason, please feel free to send me an email. I will gladly reshare the Dropbox link with the group. And yeah, we look forward to staying in touch with you. If you're planning on sharing this with your team or anything like that, we're happy to support in any way we can.
Great, thank you, Julie. Well, thanks everybody. Again, this webinar was recorded, so I will get that posted, and then Julie, I'll send it to you, and you can share it more broadly with the group, and or we can put it. Yeah, we'll probably just end up having a link to like our Vimeo. So if you need to see the recording, it's there, and then I have, like I said, an updated version of the training module. Julie, I'll get that over to you this week, and we can send out an updated version or just a reminder email to everybody with everything attached, the exercises, the module, and then the webinar link.
Hey, that sounds great.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.